primaire, même plus que primaire. Oui, oui, ça y est, c'est branché, mais ce qu'il y a, c'est qu'il y a un problème, c'est que pour la tournée, il faut savoir, c'est pas possible de la tourner, il faut savoir comment le faire et Kate l'a fait tout à l'heure. Chacun, elle a son petit caractère. Voilà. Kate is the expert. Voilà, le magic touch.
You're not going to trip over that.
Is it extremely important that happens?
This is because the video, I don't want to have to walk over there.
Yeah.
So I can
Here from the beginning.
Okay. Then we can put the walk right here.
Well, then, but I mean, as soon as I'm through with
I'm going to put it right under here.
that'll be fine.
And then if we need this, it's right here. So I'll just pass up this walk here and do it.
That'd be fun if the girls all will do it.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
It's part of the business spirit.
It is part of the
Did you go to
No, because the one watching last night.
Yes, at the Meridian.
And I thought that was going to be tonight, but that was, it was just, actually, I was helping Jane do a little of the filling for your presentation, the final product. I think she said, do you think Jane would be ashamed of this? I don't want to shame her. And I said, no, it's great. It's great.
So we didn't want Yes, you did. And it was telling me where to go for this. Yes, you told me about legal, you told me, but it was most of all that you would have taken the time to write to this poor person who had to leave Paris. Oh, Mrs. Child.
Resist.
Well, thank you so much. And when I came back here and found the library in the general, and then to know that you were a trustee of it made a huge difference too. And I want you to know that your chair in honor of General de Gaulle is out there right now tonight. Yes, you did. You've done so much for us.
Well, we were there, after the war, all during the time that he was there, and I was a great admirer of his. You were too young, Brigitte.
Yes. That's nice.
Of our Ultimate Dinner series and to this wonderful event with Julia Child. We are so excited about that. Before she begins, I wanted to thank just a couple of people that have been working behind the scenes. I spoke with Brigitte Cazalis, who you saw running around here. Where is Brigitte? She really wanted me to mention her father instead.
Brigitte, come on.
Brigitte.
There she is.
There she is. She wanted to mention her father instead, Maurice Cazalis. And apparently there was a very close relationship, we're not telling you what it was, between Julia Child, because her husband's here, and Brigitte's father. But thank you so much, Brigitte, for all your help. She helped, and so did Liz Bishop. I don't know where Liz is.
Right there.
Helped behind the scenes in preparing this and helping Julia organize this event. I would like to mention Jane Daniel, who is probably warming some things up or doing something like that. Where's Jane? Well, in any case, Jane is a publicist, a writer, and a former caterer, and she offered to do what you see on television, and that is have the presentation, that presentation at the end, you know, somebody sweeps up with the finished product, and you see how gorgeous it is. She offered to do this according to Julia's recipe. But I had to get back to her and explain that our audience wouldn't be content with just looking at this beautiful thing, and that you might want to do a little more with it, you know, like tasting it. So she ran out and got a lot more ingredients and started cooking up a storm, and then I had to get back to her and explain that it wasn't going to be in the kitchen downstairs with about 30 people maximum, but that she might have to give a taste to 80 or 90 people. No. At which one she didn't scream, but she ran out and got more ingredients, went back and was cooking like a house afire. Now, somebody came in to help, to the rescue, and his name is Jeff Gerton, and he's also with us tonight. I think he's in the front row, and he is the special sections editor of the Tab. Jane had written articles for him, and he realized she was in a bind, so he rolled up his sleeves, ran into her kitchen, and started helping her. And this was last night. About 9 o'clock, I was feeling very guilty about this, so I went over with a bottle and said, "Do you need any help?" At which point they both said, "Just pour the drinks and stop helping." So anyway, thank you, Jeff, and thank you very much, Jane. I want you to recognize someplace she is, but with the light in my eyes I can't see her. Ann Moses, as Director of Communications, began writing our French Library cookbook. Please go up and talk to Anne. Maybe she can, there she is, afterwards. If you have some great recipes, please give them to her because she's going to be doing a great cookbook. Finally, Karen LeBrun, and I don't know where she is.
She should come forward. That's what I was pitching her.
Karen? Well, Karen LeBrun is our special consultant in marketing development. You'll recognize her. She's a beautiful blonde. She's a special, oh, there she is. Special consultant in marketing development, full-time PR director of the Sheraton Boston Hotel and Towers. And she reminded us that it was today, Julia was saying exactly 12 o'clock, 1 minute this morning, that the Beaujolais Nouveau is being brought out in France. So, she prevailed upon the Sheraton Boston Hotel and Towers to donate a case of wine so that we could all have a taste. Julia, now that's enough of the introduction. I just want to tell you again how delighted we are about Julia. Julia Child is an honorary trustee of the French Library in Boston, and I think rather than tell you about her mastering the art of French cooking and her latest book on Julia Child's kitchen, I will simply mention, it's the only thing I'm going to mention before giving you Julia Child, and that is her video cassettes. Her video cassettes, The Way to Cook. And I just want to recommend them because I'm the proud possessor of a couple of these things, and they are informative and therapeutic. They're explain that. They're informative because it's a beautiful, crystal clear, step-by-step explanation of how to do these gorgeous things. And the therapy part is that it's as if you have Julia in your house. She's in your kitchen, helping you as a friend, and it's just this great feeling. So go out and buy The Way to Cook. And now I give you the greatest chef and the chef cooking expert of all times, Julia Child.
I'm awfully happy to be here at the French Library. My husband Paul, who's sitting right there in the front row, and I started out our married career in the diplomatic service, and our first post was Paris, France. And he spoke beautiful French, and I went to the Berlitz every day for 2 hours. And we just had a marvelous time, and we absolutely loved it. I was really in hysterics for probably the first 3 or 4 years. Then I got used to France, so I now can take it easily. But it was wonderful for us to come back here and to find the French Library and a real taste of France again. And in those days there was a lovely group of old French ladies who were marvelous cooks. There was Maggie Robineau, whom I think she's still around. I think she teaches it. She gives dinners. And I was suggesting to Vera that I wish that they'd have lunches again, because they used to have a lunch once a month, and there'd be about 40 people sitting in this room. There was General and Mrs. Doriot were there, and it was just a great deal of fun, and I hope that they'll be inaugurated again. It was always first come, first served for the reservations, but it was just fun, and I hope they'll do it again. And I'm delighted that we're having some cooking demonstrations. And I'm going to do some puff pastry appetizers, sort of first course things. And this is not spa cooking. If you try to make puff pastry with margarine, you've got puff pastry with margarine. What you really want is real butter. And I think that people have gotten terribly afraid of their food at this point. But as we all know, the idea is moderation in all things, and a great variety of foods and so forth, and you're allowed a certain amount of butter. And I think what's a better way of having your, say, half week's ration of butter in something very nice like puff pastry. So that's what we're going to have. I'm going to start this as a mock puff pastry, so it's much easier to make than the regular one. You can make it with any kind of a pie crust dough, but I'm going to make it with what's known as a pâte brisée fine, or a very fine butter pie crust dough, and I'm going to do it in the electric blender. Because when I first went to France, they do all this jazz about the flour in a fountain, and then make a hole in it in the butter, and you do it with your fingers. And I never was able to do it very well because my fingers are hot. So I think that this machine just makes a beautiful pie crust dough. As a matter of fact, when it first came out, Carl Sontheimer, who was the father of the food processor, had seen it over in France, but in France nobody seemed to pay much attention to it, and he brought it over here, and he gave me one of the first ones, and I started making pie dough in it, and then I showed my colleague Simca, who is Simone Beck, we call her La Super Française. She couldn't be more French, but she was absolutely thrilled with it, and everybody that I showed it to, that was way back in about '74, were just couldn't get over what it could do. And I think for pastry dough, and I hope that I can show you a trick or two how awfully well and easily it makes it. And I find that, because in France you have soft wheat flour, which is wonderful for pastry. In America, I use this King Arthur unbleached flour, and I use part cake flour with it. And with measuring, I think all my recipes is you put the cup in the flour, fill it to overflowing, and then sweep the excess off. I want 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. But I think one thing you really have to be very careful about measuring, particularly in pastry, because if you fill it up and then do that, you could have 1 ounce or more flour, and that could throw everything off. And then I'm going to keep the 1/2 cup measure. And then 1/2 cup of plain bleached cake flour. It's interesting, when we were trying to make a real puff pastry, I found that American flour made a very brittle puff pastry. And it wasn't until we happened to do a television show when LBJ was in the White House, and they had a wonderful old French pastry chef, and he made the most beautiful vol au vents, the great big ones, and the puff pastry was absolutely delicious. I said, what did you do about the flour? And he said, well, I used part cake flour, and I'd been trying to make it for years, and that was the secret. So there's 1.5 cups of all-purpose and 1/2 cup of cake flour, and then we're going to have 1.5 sticks of butter. I wish we'd go into the metric system. If any of you cooked in metrics, it's so much easier than ounces. If you want to say 4/5 of 360 ounces, it's awfully difficult. But if it was all in metrics, it'd be much easier. So this is chilled butter. I want 1.5 sticks. I think anytime you're doing pastry with a big butter content, you want to be sure that everything remains very cold. So this is chilled, and I'm going to dice it up. And then another thing is to have the pastry tender, because of American flour being hard wheat flour. You put in a little bit of Crisco. If you were making this down in Alabama, probably your all-purpose flour would be for biscuits, so it would be soft wheat. Now we have to have 4 tablespoons of chilled Crisco, and I need my 1 cup measure. Do we have that?
Yes. It's right here. No? Yeah, it's right.
There it is. So we want 1/2 cup of ice water in there, Brigitte. I don't know why they don't put Crisco in sticks. I don't want ice in it. But this is the very old-fashioned way of doing it, but it does work. So we want 4. Is that exactly? I'm going to make sure that's a little more.
It's a little
Really,
more, yeah. It's a little more.
really measure. That's how I think a lot of people go wrong because they aren't really careful about their measurements. I know this old French chef at the White House he had taught Michel Guérard, because I happened to be talking about him to Guérard, and he said, oh, that was where I started out. And very often I've heard people say that some of the very best cooks start out as pastry chefs because it makes them be exact. Now see, 4 tablespoons is 2 ounces. So how do I figure that in a cup? I figured that how I did that. I want 2 ounces is 1/4 of a cup, isn't it? See, if we all had metrics, we wouldn't have to worry. So if when this gets up to 3/4, we'll know we have enough. Can you see that, Brigitte? I don't have my
No,
glasses
you're not
on.
yet there. A little bit more. A tiny bit more. Just a bit more. And really a
Little tiny
yeah,
bit
tiny
more.
bit. You're there. Yeah, you're there.
That's it. Now this is all if you find that your pastry crusts have been a little tough, it's because of the problem with American all-purpose flour in Massachusetts. I want a teaspoon of salt in there. Now here's a good trick. If you have a food processor and you have an awful trouble getting this top off, there are 2 things that hold it there, and if you can get somebody to file those off, then you can get this off. See, isn't that nice? It's so annoying, isn't it? Now this, you just want to break this up a little bit with the pulse. And then, off it goes. And this will go in. This will probably splatter. I'll put this on it. You think? You don't want it to mass on the blade. You just want it so that it's kind of a rough texture like that, so that it'll just hold together. Because you don't want the butter broken up too much. And then if there's still some unmasked parts, you can add a little bit more water. But see that when I hold it up, that just does hold together. Mm-hmm. And now this is because the butter has not really been mixed with it a great deal. Take the heel of your hand, which is cold, not the palm, which is warm, and just smear it out like that. And that's your final blending. But I think the trick with the food processor, as you know, when you're chopping things, is don't overdo it, just do little bits. Now we just want to form that into a cake, and then that should really rest for about 2 hours. Because the flour particles absorb the moisture. Now I want the saran wrap.
Yes, that's Brigitte.
Oh, you have it, thank you. And if you're doing any pastry dough, one thing you have to have is the gluten in the flour. You know, flour has both gluten and starch, and the gluten is, I always feel it's like glue. It holds the flour, holds the pastry together. But if it's overworked, it begins resisting you and turning into something like rubber. So you want, if dough starts to resist you, just wrap it up and let it rest, and then you won't have any problems. I'm glad we don't have an overhead mirror so you can't see this mess around here. Now, now, let's see, we want the ready brisée. It's kind of rough looking. Look at that. That's it, yeah. I've done this in several stages. The nice thing about this dough, I've had, pâte brisée in the freezer for 2 years, and it's perfectly fine. I remember once when we were doing television, I had a whole lot of puff pastry, and it was really more than, I'll keep that out right here, more than 2 years, and it was still perfectly delicious. So, make a lot while you're at it. I did want to say, if anyone has any questions, do sing out, because this should be, it's informal. Now this is cold, and what I'm now going to do is to turn this pie dough into a mock puff pastry. And I'm going to roll it out into rectangles and spread it with butter and then roll it again, so that we're going to end up with layers, thin layers of butter between thin layers of dough. And if this is hard, beat it. Somebody said, isn't that going to make it tough beating it? No. One thing you want to be sure, because we're rolling it into a rectangle, keep the rectangle even. Have these things, something like that, and so that you can keep shoring up the rectangle, because we're going to be rolling it out here. And be sure that it's chilled. If it's going to be a hot day, and you're going to do a lot of pastry, it's a very good idea to get a piece of marble. Just look up marble in the yellow pages and go and get yourself a piece, and have it cut so it'll fit your refrigerator. And then when it's a cold, hot day, if you put your marble in the refrigerator, it's nice and cold, so that you don't have any trouble making your pastry. So I learned that from doing pastry on the television, where all those hot lights. I don't need, this can be off, I think.
I get your idea, no?
But remember to keep, you want the rectangle to be very even, because we want to make the little layers be even so that they will rise nicely. And I think if you haven't done much pastry dough before, start doing it, because the only way to learn is just to do it. Remember, keep it cold, and then also when you're rolling, don't roll off the edge like that, because that makes it thinner. Just come up to the edge. And then in this case, keep evening it up and pressing it out and flouring your work surface very lightly. Now I have soft butter here, and we want 2 tablespoons of butter on for 2 times, so that's 1 stick is 4 tablespoons, so there's 2, and make sure that that's nice and soft, and that's going to be spread over here. What? 1 stick is 8, so I want 2 tablespoons. So a quarter was 4, and half of a quarter is 2. Isn't that right? But this really makes a very nice puff pastry. Now, I have it written down. Well, I'll wait till we begin rolling it out. Now this goes over 2/3 of it.
Yes, 2/3.
No. And I have down how many layers it makes, which will.
Sean,
Yeah.
you always like pastry when you're making puff pastry, or maybe like cut Sunday or something like that. Do you always let them rest for?
I always let all pastry rest, because we've got that gluten, and the gluten is like rubber. And if you put it in the oven after you've rolled it out, it goes sort of like that in the oven. But when it's rested, then it's quiet. So if you have any time that you're rolling it into resist, stop where you are and refrigerate everything. Now the butter's on the first 2/3, so I'm taking the bottom third, rolling it up to the middle, and then taking the top third and rolling it down, so we have 3 layers of dough and 2 layers of butter. Now, and always get in the habit, if you're doing this, turn it so that the flap is to your right. It just is useful to get into into good habits so that you'll always know where you are when you're doing something. Now lightly flouring it, then you roll it out once more and again with some butter. But you can see if it was hot the way it was this summer. Woof. Well, even so, I think having put your marble in the fridge, you would have been all right for a little while. We were doing some photography for my new book, and we had to do some puff pastry. It was really terrible in that hot weather. As you know, I'm evening it all out, pressing out the corners if necessary. And then here's the final 2 tablespoons of butter. Better soften that up a little more so it'll spread easily. But it's certain, and even a store-bought crust turns out quite well with this. Just the addition of butter to all that Crisco helps. I love that advertisement that they did have a little while ago of a fellow who says, "I'm just a young man, but I had a heart attack and I was told to cut down on fats and cholesterol." So what was he advertising? Fleischmann's margarine, which is all fat. I don't understand. I don't know what that did him. He's probably dead by now. Serves him right. Well, that's being folded up again. And now this time you want to let it rise. Now I should.
Julia,
Yes?
how thick are you rolling that?
It doesn't make too much difference at this point. But you want to roll it out fairly thin. But when you finally get the puff pastry made, if you want it to puff, it has to be at least 1/4 of an inch. Now see, that's soft, so that will have to rest. And so we have one that is ready. 2, have 2 final rolls now, so that it takes you a little while. It should rest probably about 40 minutes. Then I'll roll this and we'll see that if it's too soft or resistant. I have another one that's all ready. How many people can you feed with these 2 things? Well, we're going to make one circular thing about 9 inches, and we're going to make 6 little feuilletés. I think you don't have recipes, I guess, for this. I think it makes, does it say 2 9-inch pies or the rectangle that we're going to make? Because every one of these things I'm going to make will be with this same amount. Now again, beat it. Keep it always in its rectangular shape, and the beating just softens it up and gets it going. But I think making this kind of pastry will really teach you all the tricks. And never get discouraged. Just think about it. Did you try to do it too fast? Was it too hot? Was it not? And then I think also you have to learn to work fast, because if you don't have a chilled marble and you linger over the pastry, then it just gets soft and you can't do a thing with it. Now again, I'm shoring up the sides. Then it gets folded in 3 again. See, every time I fold that is, what do we call that? Triples everything. Well, it's the, what do we call that? Pie? Where you put a little 3 up on the top of things. Yes, cubes it, yeah. Now you have your final roll, and then after you've done this final one, you can freeze it for 2 years. I think this is probably, I would be more sensible after this to let it rest again, because if it gets very hard to roll if you keep working it. It's perfectly all right to roll it across, sort of widen it out, but just don't ever go over the edges. I'm going to give it its final fold, and then I'll have another piece, Brigitte. You see, that's a nice and neat, isn't it? That's, I think, one of the pleasures of it. And it has a lovely feel. We can pass that around.
Here, I'll take it.
Yeah? Is there ever a point when you work the dough too much? Well, it is no. Then this thing, if I try to roll it out now, it's a little soft also, but also the gluten would be activated and turn into rubber, and it would keep pulling back from me. So whenever that happens, you just stop, and about 40 minutes of rest will usually help it.
When I make puff pastry, I thought it was going to puff more, but maybe I didn't.
This, she says, when she made puff pastry, it was going to puff more. How thick did you roll it out then?
Probably less than an inch.
Well, an inch would make it puff. Well, if it was an inch, that would be much too thick, and you probably wouldn't have cooked all the interior. Was there a lot of uncooked puff pastry inside?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's too thick. I mean, I think a little, probably, what would you say? Well, I mean, not much more than 3/8 inch, you know, would be about as much. Because remember that you have all those layers of pastry. Now, where's my little recipe there? How much does it say? Where's my recipe? So I worked out how many layers.
Which one?
Give me the layer for the puff.
400 and, you mean how many out of it? 400?
No, I want to see.
Here, yeah.
Oh,
Here, your
no, I
glasses.
have it written down here. How many layers you have?
487, isn't it? 480.
Where does it say?
Now make 324 layers of butter.
No, this and it has this every time you've done it. You had your layer of butter in the dough, of course. But then when you fold it in three, that's 2 butter and 3 flour, and then multiply that by 3. And anyway, it ends up after you've done these 4 turns that you have something like
325 layers.
325 layers.
324 layers.
Regular puff pastry would have about double that amount. But the idea is that the dough, these very thin layers of dough, puff between the layers of butter. I don't know who invented this. It was a marvelous invention, I must say. Now this is all rested and chilled and ready. Here's somebody else's glasses. Whose are they? I don't know. Maybe they're Vera's.
Actually, the real puff pastry dough is just flour and water usually.
That is just flour, water, salt, and butter.
So the difference then is that
Yeah.
this you'll have to fold less.
Well, this is just half puff pastry. In the classical one, you make what they call a détente, that's just flour and water. Then you put your package of butter in it and fold it over, and then start rolling it out. But it takes a lot longer to do. Then there's another one which I like very much, which was invented by old Denis, a chef in Paris, who, do you remember when Craig Claiborne had his $4,000 dinner? Yes. That was at Chez Denis, who was a very strange old fellow, I must say. But he invented this method of, which I've used quite a bit on the television, of where you take your flour and salt and then break it up into pieces about the size of lima beans. I find you can do it in the K5A mixer. And then you put in your water, and then you put it out, and it just looks like an absolute mess with these big flakes of butter. But as you begin rolling it out, you finally get a dough, and it's much quicker. It has 5 parts butter to 4 parts flour, because you need to keep flouring it. Now I'm going to make this in 2 pieces. I'm going to do a circle, and the other I'm going to do some little puff pastry rectangle so you can chill that. And this is how to make a free-form tart. You can use the same system for an apple tart. I'm going to make an onion tart, a pisse saladière with it. Those are so good. But I think and one thing that I think is a very good idea is that you can have these pieces of dough in your freezer if you just decide you're going to make a lot of puff pastry. Make a whole lot of it and then roll them out into little rectangles or little circles like this and stick them in your freezer, and then it's so easy to make anything out of them. This is not going to be, I don't want this to puff too much. So I'm rolling it about 1/8 of an inch thick. Now I'm going to cut it using that as a template. And again with this, after rolling it out, you want to make sure and let it rest. Now I'm going to save those. We can chill those in, but save them in one layer, then we can reconstitute it.
Are you going to glaze it on the pan or on the board?
Now this, what do we have to? Oh, give me a. Take it in your bare hands.
Here. Here, would you like this?
Yeah, that's fine. Now we have the chilled one that
Yes,
I like.
yeah, it's right here.
But you're not the original. It's just like making bread. You can't hurry it too much because you'll regret it if you. I want to wet this pan, and when you bake it, you wet the pan because you want it to grip on it, and that allows it to rise in the oven. So I'm going to turn it upside down because that's the unfloured side and lay it on there. And then again, I don't want this bottom to rise too much, so I'm pricking it all the way down to the bottom with a table fork. Then just take the edges and roll them up. If you've been over in France lately, they'll say, do you want an apple tart for dessert? And then they'll have made one very much like this. They just probably have them all in the freezer and that's all there is to it. Now, take your fork and make pressing it together and also making a little decorative edge. You can see how that is. You see the edge is just rolled up a little bit there. Now, this was supposed to have some anchovies, and we had a can of anchovies, but they'd gone through the hot weather, and we opened them up, and there was a foul odor. So we threw them out. But if you have the anchovies, you can mash up some of them with a little bit of mustard and put it in the bottom here. And then we have some cooked onions. And be sure that the onions are very tenderly cooked, because when it goes into the oven, it's not going to cook very much more. And about 2 or 3 onions just cooked in some olive oil. I should have put some, I'll put these back in. I should have put some cheese in the bottom there. And that's either grated Parmesan or Swiss, or it could be mashed anchovies. You had nice fresh ones. You know, I think one reason some people absolutely hate anchovies is because they go off really very quickly, and I think once you've opened the can, you've got to eat them all or throw them out. Here's our olive oil. We'll put a little olive oil on that. This makes a very nice luncheon dish or a cocktail appetizer. I'll put a little more cheese on the top there. I'm going to put a few little herbs on. That's what I'm demonstrating. We have one bottle of herbs, and I'll say, well, this is Italian seasoning, or this is tarragon. Actually, it's tarragon, but I'm going to say that it's Italian seasoning. Saves a little bit of space. I'll put a little more olive oil on there. And that's going to go into a 450 oven. It'll take about 20 or 30 minutes to bake. It's done when the bottom, when you lift up the bottom and that is brown and crisp. And a very good idea is if you have a pizza baking stone, form this on a very lightweight foil and stick it right on the pizza stone and you'll get much the best crust. What? No, I'm not going to. Now we're going to make a rectangular tart, a Roquefort tart. This again, very much the same idea.
30 to 40 minutes, so everybody yell.
I hope it won't be that long.
No, it says.
I thought you said 20 to 30.
It says bake 30 to 40
Well,
minutes.
we'll see.
Level.
What would you like? Would you like that?
You know, just any ready dough.
Any way you check, okay? You want the,
Now these are all ready.
yeah, but you can have this one if you want, just, you know, visit
No, that's for the little rectangle. This is for the big rectangle. So this one you want to see how, but let's have one of our trays so we'll see how big we can make it.
These?
No, I mean the baking sheet. That one right there. This is very much the same idea. But I like these because they're so very simple to make. And again, this is not going to puff a great deal, but the puff pastry is that much nicer than the plain pie dough because it has a lovely sort of tender crispness inside it. It's hard to describe. Well, you'll taste it when you do.
Can you ever make a pastry that's sweet?
Can you ever make puff pastry that's sweet? You could. It's usually not done though, because you usually have the basic puff pastry, and then it's not like the pie dough, which you don't put sugar in. Possibly also if you put the sugar in the puff pastry, it might brown too much too, because it has to cook in a very hot oven really to get going. But
What about the panier?
well, that's different. As this Brigitte was saying, the palmier cookies, that's quite different
Yes,
though,
no,
isn't
yeah.
it? You know. Brigitte is a caterer, and she does lots of puff pastry appetizers.
This method of doing it any,
What'd you say?
is this method of doing it in any of your books?
Is this in any of my cookbooks? Seems to me it is. It's going to be in my new one anyway. I'll wet this one again. No.
Roll it on the pin.
This I'll roll it up on the pin and I'll roll it. Oh. Do the same thing of rolling this up again. You could, if you wanted, make strips. If you wanted higher edges, you could cut strips out and lay them on, and then you'd have the edges a little bit higher. but it would also take you longer to do, of course.
How does the water content of the contents that you put on top affect it?
How do you mean? How does the water?
Does the water content of the onions or the cheese or whatever you put on top, is that?
No, no, it doesn't while it's baking. I'm pressing this down again. I think I should have painted that with a little. These things like this are very free form, and I'm just putting a little water on there so it'll stick. I also have one that's already formed, so we won't have to wait with this. And I was pressing. You probably can't see a thing, can you? I'll hold it up. There it's that way now, and then I'm going to raise the edges a little bit. See, that has those fork marks. And I'm going to put my thumb on and then press the edge with the fork. That's the way it looks now, rather rough, but you wouldn't want a puff pastry to be too neat.
You want to prick that?
No, because we're going to use the one that's already chilled and rested.
On the show, you did the show, who got to eat all the things?
We eat them. This is who eats the things on our show. We eat them, so it's all very good. Now here's the one that's set. I'm going to raise it up just a little bit more.
How long do you chill it for?
Well, I'd at least half an hour, or you could form it and chill it for a year. That's the good thing about it. Now this is going to be with blue cheese. And I'm just going to spread the blue cheese in. Cut it up first. Or Roquefort is lovely with it. Remember we were doing it on the television, I did kind of a Roquefort closed tart. And I said on the show, and of course if you don't want Roquefort, you can use blue cheese. And I got an angry letter from the Roquefort people saying, no, can't say that.
And this is Gorgonzola.
This is Gorgonzola. But I was awfully glad that the Roquefort people were protecting their name. So I think a lot of, like Chablis certainly want to correct its name. We shouldn't. I think it's terrible calling our wines by other names. This would have been better and easier to do if it had been a little more chilled. But we're getting there. I'm just spreading this in kind of roughly.
Roughly how much cheese do you have?
We've got half a pound, but I won't be using that much. But the nice thing about this, it doesn't make too much difference what you're using. Now I have, see, nice big lumps of it around there.
If you have a second, do you want to look at this tart?
It looks very
Yes.
Looking incredibly fast.
Oh, it is. Well, that's good.
very fast. It's very nice and brown.
Okay, can you take it out? Take a look. It has to be brown on the. Doesn't that look
It
nice?
does look beautiful.
Yeah, it looks good.
How's it?
Feels a little wet.
Yeah, that isn't done. I think we could turn the oven down a little bit. When you're cooking it, remember you have to cook all those 425 layers of dough.
350?
Yeah. Now, here's this for you.
Thank you.
Now we have, where are my eggs? There they are. Now this is just going to have an egg and cream and a little bit of Worcestershire. I think I'll use 1 egg and maybe 2 yolks. This again, you do about what you want. I don't know what the recipe says.
2.
It says 2. I'll get.
Karen suggested that we raffle the finished product off.
Fine. Anything you want. Wait a minute. We'll put another yolk in there. I think that's a good idea. We did a demonstration in Texas, in Longview, Texas, with a lot of oil people there. And even things like a spinach tart went for $500 and $600. And I said, gosh, in Boston, if you got $8, you'd be lucky. That's some cream. So here it is. I'm going to put a few drops of Worcestershire in here.
I'm sorry.
And some pepper.
It says whisk 3 egg yolks. Yeah.
Well, that's all right. This is really very much like a quiche mixture. That's heavy cream. Then you put as much on as will go, without going over the edges. Well, the eggs make it puff a little bit, and the cream gives it that certain moelleux that we all know.
40 minutes is too long.
Yeah, I think that is.
Yeah.
Now, you want to be sure that that doesn't go over the edge. Uh-oh, uh-oh, uh-oh. Where's a spoon? Do we have a spoon?
C'est tout ce que j'ai là. C'est pas, vous avez une...
Oh, we have a little spoon?
Yeah. Here, did we have this?
No, we'll take that. Too greedy. I'll put that back in there. If it goes over the edge, then it'll really go over everything. Push those edges up a little more to hold things in. Now I need a bit of paper towel. There. And all that. Oh, I can't hold this up because there's too much cream in it. The main thing is don't let it go over the edge. Now, Brigitte, if you can carry that very carefully in.
Do you want me to spoon some out anyway?
No, I think that'll do. Then watch it, and if anything happens, we'll see. I think as soon as it catches. Here. Oh, good, Marianne can open this.
And you're expecting this again?
Yes, we'll take a look at that one.
We're going to have to call that done.
I think that's about it. That was very nice, I think. Here,
Would you like
let's
to
fold it up.
spatula?
We have a little thing to put it on. We have that little white plate. Let's
Here.
put it on that and we can pass it around. Good. There, we can pass that around and everyone can look at it.
Here, no, just put it down. Just drop it.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to do those little feuilletons, those little rectangles of puff pastry about like that puff up. Then you can put caramelized pears inside, or I'm going to roll it. Give me that. There's that little piece that we saved. these are some of the most useful things to have as first courses, say that you bake them and then you split them open, as you can see, and then you put fresh asparagus with a little hollandaise or white butter sauce, you know, or I'm going to use some lobster, or you'd have pastry cream and caramelized apples and a little whipped cream. It's just lovely. And they're very nice to have on hand. There's one that we'd already rolled up half, that one that was saved in that little piece.
So it was a little round one,
A little- You know, there's one I cut the round one and then
the square.
that was it.
This.
That's it. Fine. This is a little bit soft.
Yeah,
There.
it is too soft, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, ça coule. Ça coule. La plaque n'est plus plate, alors ça coule.
Ah.
La plaque.
Oh, could you fix that up, Marianne?
Oui, attends.
Take anything out. Having a little trouble with our rectangle because I was greedy and filled it too full. Marianne's going to remove a little bit of it. Now these are the rectangles, and these you do want to have a quarter-inch thick.
How thick did you say?
A good quarter-inch, because we want these to puff. The other ones were not a quarter, so they're not puffing that much. I have a ruler. I better put on my glasses where they're somewhere. There they are. No, there's a quarter. That's just about it. I want these to roll evenly, so I'm going to cut off the very edges. And again, squaring up the rectangle properly. I'm going to cut it, just cut it right in half. And if you make the rectangles too narrow, they topple over, so they have to be somewhat fat. Let me get about like that. And do we have a baking sheet for these, Elizabeth?
Pardon me?
These are actually now a little bit too fat as rectangles. I'll cut them off a little bit, but we can reconstitute the puff pastry. The nice thing is that your scraps you can turn again into puff pastry, so you're not losing anything. And these again are on a wet pastry sheet. Then these, of course, you can just keep in your freezer raw and then bake them just before going. Now these, oh, this is just right. This will go in that other oven. You see that one recipe of dough made this 8-inch tart and then these 6 rectangles. We used to have a bit of leftover. Now we have some ready ones, haven't we? These again should rest, because if they don't rest, they'll all bake out of shape.
Putting a glaze on this?
Yes, no, that's later. Keep them all in one layer, honey. Yeah. Now, where's my fork? No, what I want. I have a skewer here. Now this is a trick with puff pastry that we want to keep it rising and keep it going up straight and not being falling over. And a good idea is to take a skewer and poke it down 2 or 3 times, and that sometimes sets the layers. You run into all these tricks that people tell you about. Sometimes they work and sometimes not. Now I'm going to have some egg glaze, so I want one more egg.
This, would you like me to put it in?
Fine. Remember that movie with Audrey Hepburn? She did this. I thought, if she can do it, I can do it. I can even do it with 2. usually. Tiny bit of water.
Sorry, a couple of ice cubes.
Just a little bit of water. I'll put a tiny bit of salt in it because I think that helps the egg white and yolk to blend. The egg glaze gives it that lovely kind of a shiny brown color. You want 2 coats on it, and be sure that you don't let the egg glaze drip down onto off the sides, because that could hold down the puff. So we'll give it 1 coat and then a second one. Then they have to have a little knife mark decorations. Now take your little knife and make some cross hatch marks. So you're just cutting down into it. And that breaks up the glaze a little bit and then also gives you a little decoration on the top. You know those wonderful desserts called the pitivier, which is a big round thing with a top with striations. In that one, you go quite a bit deeper, so it makes cartwheels.
Can you get fancy sometimes and make them like maybe fish, like our fish?
Oh yes, you can do all kinds of things like that. This is making decorative fancy things, and they puff all the way up. It's lovely. Well, that's going to go again. That'll be about 10 minutes or so.
What is the temperature of the oven?
Well, they all start out at 450, because you want to give them a big push, and then if you have a great big thing, you would start it out at 450 until it had begun to rise and it was fairly fully puffed. Then you turn it down to about 400, and you have to bake it until all the edges that have risen are crisp, and keep remembering that you have all those layers to cook. And a great big one, very often, like in these, the very center probably won't be cooked. So you scrape that out. Then you can turn that into something too. Now we're going to have to, where's our wok?
Our wok is here.
The big stove is downstairs, so.
Where do you want it? Over there?
Yeah, right over here.
What do you want to temp on?
Now we want the lobster.
Temp on what, Julia?
High.
High?
Yeah.
400?
Yeah. Well, this is going to be a little lobster sauté. And this is cooked lobster. This came from Legal Seafood, so it should be good. We're going to pretend that I have some shallots in here, which I didn't bring. Just about a tablespoon of finely minced shallots.
Did you put lemon juice and vermouth and all those things in?
Not going to yet. So we're going to have a little. Well, this actually is tarragon this time. If you had lobster tamale, you could start cooking that first for about 4 or 5 minutes until it all, and you be sure you got a female lobster. And then when you put your lobster meat in, everything turns a beautiful pink.
Yeah, it's here.
I'm going to put a little bit of vermouth in there now. It just needs to be warming through.
Yeah.
Where's my cream?
Where's what?
Where's my cream?
Cream? Oh, your cream.
I'm going to put a little cream. Now this you can, I'm going to put, this, the recipe doesn't have cream, I'm going to put a little bit in because we have a lot. And then this is going to have a white butter sauce. This is for, it's a nice dish for indulgence. Now, where's it? Said Laura. Very hot.
It's on 400 now.
Yeah, all right. We had to go around doing a book tour, and we were doing a paella, and we had this wok with us, and it was rather fun doing a American supermarket paella in a Chinese electric wok.
Yeah.
Now I just want to let that boil down and concentrate. Now, does anyone have any great remarks to make?
Do you use the vermouth wine because it's easy and available, or do you think it's just as good as...
This is why do I use vermouth? Well, I think it's very hard to get, in this country, to get really the right wine for cooking. It has to have some character, but not too much. You don't want it sour, and you don't want it thin. And if you're in France, you'd use a Macon, a white Macon, but that's very expensive here. And I've been using vermouth for years, but I always use Noilly Prat. I really ought to have some stock in it. But,
Do you want to pick an eye on the cups?
yes, how does it look? No.
I'd like to have it.
We're going to take a look at how this is doing.
It's also something that when it's opened, it keeps. So you don't have to keep it.
I just turned it.
Overflow there.
How many minutes?
How are our puff pastry doing?
They're okay.
They're
How
coming
many
along.
minutes have we been in? 5.5?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to wait a while. Maybe you should pass around to where's Vera?
Right here, would you like to have the other hors d'oeuvres?
Why don't we have them? Good, and then we'll go on with this. Tastes good. That can go back. Covered in with that. Yeah,
I
fine.
made your recipe, your Bouche de Noël recipe that was in Food and Wine magazine.
Oh yeah.
And would it be okay to use half milk chocolate instead of just 12 ounces of dark chocolate?
This was a question about a bûche de Noël. I had a recipe that used dark chocolate. This young man was wanted to know whether you could use milk chocolate or something else. You can use anything that works, I think. So I know when you see good old French chefs, anything that's at hand they use.
It's a good recipe.
Well, that's good. Did it turn out well?
Yeah, pretty well.
Good.
I wanted to make it before I had to big thing.
Yeah. I think I might
I
make
have a
these.
question.
What?
Puff pastry, is it good to keep opening the oven to check, or is
Now
that bad?
is it good to keep the oven to check? In an oven like this, it cools it off so quickly. The less you open it, the better.
Okay.
Because this is such a wide door.
What didn't you do that?
Huh? Yeah, that's looking fine, but the bottom isn't. Good. Let's go with it. I'll make the white butter sauce on this. What is this attached to now?
This is not attached to anything, but it can be attached to this.
Yeah, it can.
And so shall we try it?
Yeah.
Now
I'm gonna turn that off. I'm gonna make a white butter sauce to go with the lobster. I was going to make it at the wok, but I better make it in a more conventional way. Are they passing around one way?
Something.
I just
just
turned it
going
off. Yeah.
Okay.
This is going to start out with a reduction of lemon juice and vermouth. And when you're making a white butter sauce, you have to have a strong acid to get the process going. So I'm using my towel as a strainer, which is very useful. On the television I always used a purple towel because the white ones they don't like because it doesn't show up properly. So a little vermouth in there. And that's going to have to boil down, so we might as well drink our wine.
How much lemon juice and how much vermouth?
Let's say about 2 tablespoons of each. The more lemon juice